in my last two reviews, I had a magical wand in the beginning of these reviews, but today we are going to be talking about the writing in Harry Potter. And as everyone knows, the pen is mightier than the wand. Hey everyone, so welcome to the third part of my 4-part video series on Harry Potter and the Sorcerer's Stone. If you haven't checked out parts 1 and 2, I would check those out, though it's not necessary. They should be in the card up above. And without further ado, let's get started. So, if you don't know this, myself and my writing partner, Grace Thompson, have been trying to publish our first book for a few years now. We've sent it out to several literary agents and a few contests, and so far we haven't really seen well results. So so whenever I told this to people, they would always tell me this one story about J.K. Rowling and the Sorcerer's Stone. So apparently, if you've never heard the story, so the story goes that J.K. Rowling sent her book out, 56 different publishers and agents, literary agents, and she didn't get any results until one day, supposedly, the literary agent had their kid over and they grabbed a hold of the first few pages of this book, and the kid liked it so much and had actually asked to see, like, where's the rest of the book, and that's how she got her literary agent, and then eventually obviously got published, and of course became one of the best selling books of all time. Now, this story was always supposed to, be hopeful and everything, like, well, if it took J.K. Rowling so long, then eventually someone's going to like, my book. It doesn't mean that my book is bad, because no one has liked it. Well, let's just say, I know why this was rejected so many times. So if you don't know this about the querying agents and stuff, most of the time they ask for your query letter, and then you send out like your first either 10 to 30 pages depending on the agent, what the agent wants. So after reading this first chapter, I know I was rejected so many times. Okay, so if this is your first video in my series, let's get something clear here. I don't hate this book at all. If you looked at part 1 and part 2, if you haven't seen it, you would know that I don't hate all the aspects of this book. But her writing, it's something. Her writing is not very well. It gets better as the book continues, but particularly like the first chapter or 2 is really bad. Like it's bad. Is it the worst thing in the world? No. And again, no intentional insult to J.K. Rowling or anything, like she'd never see this, but obviously, this is her first book, so of course this is, not going to be, perfectly written, or at least this is her first published book, and so naturally this isn't going to be her best work, and from what I've heard from everyone, the series gets better as it continues. Let's get into this. What do I mean her writing is bad? Does it mean that the characters are bad or the world building is bad? No, I've already discussed my problems on that. Check part 1 and 2. But it does mean that not so much the prose, but how it was written and the way she wrote things and the way she set things up was not very well. And I'm going to mostly be talking about the first chapter, because the first chapter is by far one of the worst first chapters I've ever read. This is not, again, disclaimer, it's not one of the worst books I've ever read, not by far, but this is really bad first chapter. I read this first chapter and I was like, oh my god. Like, this book is so overrated. Why does everyone like this book? After I finished reading the first chapter. Then I read the rest of the book and I see why people enjoyed it. But this first chapter's bad. Right, why do I think it's bad? Well, let me explain. So, first of all, it starts off, the first 8 pages of this book are set in Mr. Dooley's perspective. Everything is third person, which, is fine. It's third person limited, but the first part is set in Mr. Dooley's perspective. The main problem with doing this as your first chapter, as your first introduction to the world, is we're not actually being introduced to the wizarding world, which is where most of the book takes place. We're being introduced to our worlds that has the wizarding world sort of part. It's like the human world, but then it's also sort of introducing to the wizarding world, but it's not. The problem with this third narrator is that it's limited to his thoughts. We only know his thoughts, but we know things going around him that he doesn't realize. At one point, so he's sitting in his office doing meaningless tasks, and he was so into his work that he didn't know the owls flying around the city all nilly-willy. And I'm okay, why? It's a really bad beginning. And this is my first taste of Harry Potter, and it's hard to explain in words on how much I disliked it, but I will try my best. How this is beginning to set up. So it's set up with this, and we see basically the normal perspective of a character who, mind you, is out of the entire book by chapter 3 or 4. He comes back obviously at the end. He comes back at the end of the book, but why? Out of all the characters that you could have had in this first chapter's perspective, he's never shown again. We never see his perspective again. Why did you do it? Freaking halfway through this chapter, it switches, from his limited perspective. Why? The only thing I could think of on how introducing this book and this world works is if it was in first person and it was in his first person. That is the only way it could have possibly been worse. You might think, okay, I think you're over-exaggerating a bit, Emily. It's clearly not the worst opening of all time. Compared to the rest of the book, it is. There's a difference. Yes. Have I read worst openings than this? Yes. But at least those openings reflect the rest of the book. This opening does not reflect the rest of the book. That's why it's so bad. And that's why she was rejected so many times, I bet. Because I bet if she didn't do it like that, it wouldn't have gotten rejected as much. Facts of life. I'm sorry, but it is. It doesn't introduce any important characters. It doesn't introduce any important parts of the world building. It's just... However, this is not the first chapter I've ever written. That belongs to my cinema. But it does get better at the end. It's at night, and it's Dumbledore and McGonagall. I'm pronouncing that wrong. McGonagall. Professor McGonagall and Hagrid at the end, where they're actually dropping off Harry at the Dooley's house. That part wasn't bad. That part was actually good. It was actually good. The problem is that the first 8 pages are so bad. I don't know how the first part of this got published. Were people just afraid to tell J.K. Rowling that the first part of her book sucks? Because it does. I don't know. I don't know who got this through editing. If I was editing her book, I would tell her to cut it, and then I would start this chapter on the line. There would be a few, obviously, switch it up because it wouldn't be this good start of a chapter. Page 8, I would start with, a man appeared on the corner. The cat had been watching, apparently so suddenly and silently, you'd have thought he'd just popped out of the ground. The cat's tails twitched and its eyes narrowed. I would start there, basically, in the story, that's where I would start. And I don't know if I would necessarily do, a first chapter, or, even if it was, a prologue or whatever, or it could be the first chapter. I guess it doesn't really matter. But that's what I would have done, and honestly, if I was editing this book, that's what I would have told J.K. Rowling to do. I'm not saying that I could have written this book better. I'm just saying I could have edited better. That's all I'm saying. Ugh, I'm not done ranting about this, I'm sorry. But this is not setting up the world correctly. We're literally being introduced to this world in the worst possible way. I can't... Yeah, no, that part drove me crazy. That entire first part. Like, if I was rereading this, or if you're rereading this, go back to this. Like, honestly, like, if you have read this entire series, go to your library, pick up a copy of this if you can, and just reread the first 8 pages of this, or like the first chapter, and tell me that this isn't the worst chapter, that's not the worst chapter of Harry Potter you've ever read. I doubt it would be. I can't imagine a worse first chapter. J.K. Rowling, please don't disappoint me in the next few books. Alright, I need to move on from that part of the first chapter, because the rest of the first chapter is fine. It's written fine, and it was actually, she introduced the worlds really well. And like how, like, it was a lot of showing. Like, she showed how magic was being used. She wasn't telling the audience how the magic was being used. You know, you see the cat in the transfiguration, and you see Dumbledore with his, like, lighter thing and everything, and turning off all the lights. You see Hagrid and the bike, and you realize, whoa, this is this really cool whole world and everything, and it's just, whoa, this is so cool. And then, and like, by this point, I was like, okay, I understand why people are liking this. Like, this is getting pretty interesting. Like, the first part is still terrible, and I hate it, but this part is actually pretty interesting. And I was like, totally good. And they left, you know, they left Harry, and then she ruined it. She ruined the end of the first chapter. I would love to say that the end of the first chapter was good, but no, I can't, because this last paragraph happened. Let me tell you, this last stupid freaking paragraph. Remember when I said she was doing really good at showing, not telling in that part? Well, she had to ruin it at the end of this first chapter. So, if you haven't read this in a while, or you haven't read this, let me read it to you. Alright. Harry Potter rolls over inside his blankets without waking up. One small hand closed on the letter beside him. He slept on, not knowing he was special, not knowing he was famous, not knowing he would be woken in a few hours' time by Mrs. Dooley's scream as she opened the front door to put out the milk bottles, nor that he would spend the next few weeks being coddled and pinched by his cousin Dooley. He couldn't know at this very moment, people meeting in secret all over the country were holding up their glasses and saying in hushed voices, "To Harry Potter, the boy who lived." You might be wondering, what was wrong with that? I'll tell you what's wrong with that. First of all, why didn't she show what happened? Why? Why couldn't we see Mrs. Dooley in the morning taking out her milk bottles and seeing it for the first time? Why did you have to tell us that? We already know he's special. It was already explained earlier. We didn't need to be told again. We know that people were celebrating Harry Potter. That was said earlier in the chapter. Why did you have to do that, J.K. Rowling? Why? You don't have a good explanation, do you? Because there is no good explanation for that. Yes. You might be thinking, Emily, I think you're going a little too crazy. The answer is no. I am not going too crazy. This is ridiculous. This I cannot stand. No! Alright. But, you know, as I said, besides the first chapter, I still have problems with it, but it does get better. Mostly because that's when the worlds and the characters are introduced, and as I said, that was the better parts of the book. But it's not that the writing was always so terrible that it took me out. There was only a few times where it took me out. Overall, the writing was pretty mediocre besides it. Her prose were fine, obviously, and everything, and there was nothing really bad about it. I mean, there was an editor that went through it. And yeah, but there are a few things, though, that took me out of the story, and there are a few things that I didn't like how she does it. So I explained, if you haven't seen part 2 of my video, I mentioned this earlier, though, that I don't hate the world building. I hate more on how she introduces it. And that's because it's a lot of telling. She tells Harry Potter everything. She doesn't show us, the audience, and we're not seeing it through his eyes. It's really being told to him a lot. Like the Quidditch scene. So he's learning about Quidditch, and like it's literally him telling how to play Quidditch. And I guess that scene isn't terrible, and that's definitely not the worst case of it. Here's how I would have done that differently, though. Like, you could have had it where he goes to the first practice and he's seeing them play it, and then they could come down and be like, hey, like, you know, it was like, do you know how to play? And Harry could be like, no, and then they could explain, you know, the rules that maybe he wouldn't know, or that us as the audience wouldn't know, and then bam. That didn't really bother me too much. What bothered me more was when they would show something and then they would tell you. This happens actually in the third and second chapter. The first chapter is by far the worst chapter in this book. However, in the third chapter, basically everything that we were shown in the first chapter is basically told to us at some point in this book. I'm not even kidding. And some things are repeated, like Harry Potter is special, Harry Potter is special, Harry Potter is special. And there's multiple ways she tells us that he's special. I get it. He's special. Stop telling us that. No. And she shows us sometimes how he's special, which I like, because you can't just tell audience that someone's special. You have to show it. And I don't mind that. But then she tells us multiple times that he's special. I get it. He's special. He survived Voldemort. Great. What does that have to do with anything? I don't know. There's other examples of she tells what happens in a scene and like she doesn't show us. One of the things, and I mentioned this earlier as well in another video, but so it was towards the end of the book, and people aren't speaking. So it was after Harry got caught sneaking out at night, and so he gets caught sneaking out, and he loses like a bunch of points for Gryffindor. And he says something on like how even the Hufflepuffs and Ravenclaws aren't speaking to him anymore because, you know, they were mad that Slytherin is winning and they wanted to see Slytherin lose, which, first of all, in my head I would think, okay, fine, but like, really? Alright. But second of all, I was like, wait a second. One, you told us that was happening, you didn't show it, and two, no time in the book was it shown or really even told. Except I guess we were told that he's popular. But it was never shown to us that, like, you know, him speaking to Hufflepuffs or Ravenclaws. In fact, we don't know any students, by name at least, who are members of those two houses. Like, what? No. And that was one thing, and she does this a few times, like, she'll just, like, it's kind of like, just be like, so she'll be like to Harry Potter, and like a character will be like, oh yeah, so this, and this. And then, like, we'll be, like, shown that, or, like, we'll be shown it, and then it'll be explained. As I said, basically everything that was said in the first chapter, like, there's Wizard, there's Wizarding World and everything, was basically all re-explained to us, and it wasn't shown to us again. Like, there's a difference between showing things multiple times, like, showing that Harry Potter special multiple times, I think is almost even, like, needed, or, like, showing that there's a Wizarding World and everything. Yes, that needs to be shown in multiple ways, but you don't ever tell an audience something more than once. You can show things more than once, but you can never tell an audience more than once because they will figure it out. At least I figured it out, and I picked up on it, and it drove me crazy. And there were a few other things, though, that, like, she'll be like, so, like, the narrator, since, as I said, it's a third person, and it is limited, but it's weird. Like, I usually write in first person myself, but, like, the narration was kind of weird, so it'd be like, so it'd be like normal narration, like fine or whatever, and then like all of a sudden it would get like super meta and everything because like this is limited, like this is a limited, this isn't an omniscient. You know, if it was omniscient, then like I guess that would be different. But this is a limited third person narrator. So I was like, okay, and then all of a sudden it would become like omniscient, and it would be like, yes, and this person didn't know that this was gonna happen. I read it in that one chapter, which is the end of the first chapter, which you already saw, it's like, and he didn't know that later on or somewhere else. They did this a lot in the first chapter, which is again why I hate it so much. But they did it a few other times. Well, they did it this one other time, and it drove me absolutely crazy. It actually took me out of the story. Like, it was one of the few times that it took me out of the story. So it was in chapter 10, and it was on page 179. So it's the end of chapter 10, and she goes, so this is on Halloween, and the troll gets out, and Ron and Harry save Hermione's life. And up to that point, Hermione, they didn't like Hermione. And so they go, but from that moment on, Hermione Granger became their friend. There are some things that you cannot share without ending up liking each other, and knocking out a 12-foot mountain troll is one of them. That's sweet. But it's terrible. I'm crazy, and I know it, and I don't care. It was like, why did you tell us that? Kind of were picking up that, I was kind of, picking up that Hermione was becoming it. And, okay, granted, I was kind of spoiled, so, I knew Hermione was, a main character in the series and everything, but no, I picked up that she was becoming their friend. I knew that this was the turning point. It was pretty obvious, when she stood up for them and everything, and yeah, I got that. Why did you tell us that? Could you not show us that, or show us that in the beginning of the next chapter, them hanging out or whatever? And whenever she does this, it always sort of takes me out of the story. As I said, sometimes are better than others. When she's re-explaining the magic system, the 4th or 5th time, it's not that bad. Or if it's she's telling information for the first time, it's okay. It could be better, but it doesn't take me out of the story. But when things like that happen, or it's already shown earlier, I can't. Or it's already touched on or explained, it's just redundant. Overall, though, the actual prose, how she's written everything, it was okay. I can't really say they were amazing. There was no point in the book where I was like, whoa, this was written amazingly. There's no way this could have possibly been written better. I never felt that, but it definitely wasn't bad, and I can't exactly say that I could have completely written this book better. As I said, I could probably have edited it better, but I don't think I could have written this book better, so take that as it will. Well, that's it for this video. If you like it, hit that like button down below and subscribe to my channel to see more videos. I will be posting part 4, the final part of this series, next Tuesday, so keep a lookout for that. If you do not know, I myself and my writing partner have a website and a blog. Link is down below. Check that out if you want. And so, check us out on Facebook at Kerman.Thompson. I will see you in the next video.